Thank you very much. So a bit about me. I started off as an analytical chemist. I actually started my career not far from here in Burton District Hospital. Did a couple of years there. Then I did 35 years working for AstraZeneca. Then at the beginning of this year, I went a bit mad and decided to leave and set up on my own. So yeah, that was quite a change. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of pharmaceutical manufacturing. I know that this is quite a broad audience. Talk a bit more about quality control, what it is, and why it's quite a constraint in that manufacturing process. Then talk about how work is actually organised within a QC lab, and then the output of improving flow and how you can understand capacity. So, next slide. So, pharmaceutical manufacturing process. You've got raw materials coming in. They have to get tested, the product's made, then the product's tested, and then it goes out to warehouse, and then it goes out to pharmacies. So QC is in two parts of the process, as you can see there. Input materials have to be tested, output material has to be tested, everything has to be safe for you as patients to take it. And it's a regulatory requirement to have the materials tested. But if it was only quite that simple, so at most manufacturing sites, you've got multiple products and only one QC lab. You may have multiple teams, but you'll only have one QC lab, and you have multiple products. And if you introduce a new product, then you have to validate that product and validate that manufacturing process, which means one batch becomes 10 batches. So when you look at the QC team, you've got your raw materials coming in, you've got your product going out, you've got validation samples, and you have a regulatory requirement to revalidate, and then you've got stability testing. So if you make any changes to your pharmaceutical manufacturing process, then you have to put stability samples down. So to the uninitiated, so you have to put 3 batches down per year anyway, which is samples are kept at 4 degrees, 25, 60, and 40 degrees, 75% relative humidity. We have these rooms where samples are kept. So you don't send anyone with glasses to the 40, 75 because that's how it's kept. It's kept in yeah, Joe's been there. You can't, so these samples are pulled 1, 3, 6, 12, 24 months, longer depending on the shelf life. So this is to make sure that the medicines you take are safe. Any changes to the process hasn't changed the safety of those medicines. And there's a regulatory obligation to do stability. So QC has lots of competing customers. You have one lab, maybe multiple teams, but there's a lot of work going in there, lots of competing customers wanting validation samples, wanting their products tested, the raw materials, different manufacturing leads. So just an introduction, an overview of what some pharmaceutical testing looks like. We've got, on the top left, that's dissolution testing. So that's, you put a tablet into a media, 6 tablets, 6 different pots, and then you take samples to make sure the tablet disperses. And then you may take those samples and then put them on, do some chromatography. That tells you the concentration of whatever's in there. You also take some samples, do some more analysis, and tell you if any impurities are in there. Lots of automation within a QC lab as well. You've got infrared and your appearance as well. You have to make sure they look how they say they're going to look. There's no chips. They are the right shape and size. They're the right colour. And as you can probably appreciate, all these tests take different amounts of time. And even with high levels of automation, your constraint on your process is your people. So when you look back on that on the previous slide, just go back one. Every sample, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a raw material, a product, validation, or stability, sample enters the lab, goes into a queue, the testing is done, and that's the value add bit for the person, preparing the samples. Then they're analysed using high levels of automation. Then the data is interpreted, processed. The data has to be reviewed. Again, there's a compliance aspect to that. Then the material is released. So everything goes through that 5-step process. So when you look at how QC work is organised, it's traditionally organised in a push system. You have a team of people, they range in competency, and you push the work in. You look at what their availability and give them the work. And you can see here, so this material here has a specification of 5 tests: blue, black, red, green and yellow. And with the red one being the most complicated, and you can see from this slide here, you can only get 7 batches out of this team a week. Doesn't matter about the rest of the work, but the organisation, but this is how the work's traditionally organised. It doesn't take any account of competency. This person here is obviously very well trained, so they get a lot of the most difficult tests. Doesn't take into account how, if this person here decides to take a holiday or has a sick child, so that work then has to be redistributed and reorganised. Doesn't take into account if one of those competing customers says, my work's really urgent, we need to reorganise this to get my urgent thing through. So push does, though, keep everyone busy. And as a boss, you want to see everyone busy. You don't want people sat around. And also as a boss, if an urgent thing comes in, I feel really important because I've prioritised, intervened, but prioritised some work. I've done the prioritisation. So, and there are lots and lots of digital options of how to schedule work. You can Google anything and there's lots of very expensive digital options that will push the work into a QC lab. So like I say, there are some advantages. It's visible. Everyone's always busy, but it's completely output focused. It constantly, usually covers up things you've been putting off. You don't see any variation. The training aspect, it's like, we've just got to get this batch out. We've just got to get this batch out. And it does hide a lot of the bottlenecks in the process. So the other way you can organise your QC function is by having a pull system. You pull the work limit, the amount of work in progress. You understand where your constraint is. So for this specification, it's the red test. And then you line up your work, and then you put more effort into queue management. So you can improve the flow of work, constantly driving training across your team. That is your constraint, getting the best out of your people. And you can also manage your competing customers by, if something urgent comes in, you can let them finish that and then move something further up the queue. So you can actually do a lot more work in properly prioritising and being able to manage the flow of work. So by improving flow, you can minimise the amount of disruption, get the best out of your people. And there are advantages. So you're focusing on completion. So one thing I like to say to my teams when I'm going through this transition is you stop starting and start finishing. Drive completion, get things done and out, and then move on to the next thing. It creates a team focus. I think based on the talks from Dave and Joe, this is quite a change in work and change in how to manage work. The previous system, the push system, pushing the work out onto people, it's curious going through that change. As a leader, you're asking, to move to pull, you're asking your team to manage their own work. Whereas a push system, I can push you and I can tell you what to do. That's quite a transition for people to go through. Some people like it, and you do get a significantly higher level of engagement with a lot of the team. Downside, some people just don't like it, they want to be come in and told what to do every day. But it does improve knowledge sharing, and it is such a significant transition. If you don't prepare for the change well, everything grinds to a halt. And I've been in that situation where everything grinds to a halt and no one wants that. Then every customer comes to you and says, when's my work going to be done? That said, when you get to this point where you can pull and improve the flow and the work flows through the lab, the other advantage is your customers stop bothering you because they grow in confidence on the flow of work and how it gets through the lab. They stop coming to you because they have that confidence. You say it starts on a Monday, finishes on a Friday, and you've got that, you can do that repeatedly, then it's great. So you've got extra time then because you're not fending off your customers saying, well, you know, it'll be ready on Friday, it'll be ready on Thursday, because they have that confidence. So what does it look like? Simply, we started off with a paper system of work packages and tasks, like on the previous slide. And then having a very, very well-defined process, that's when we started to look for digital solutions. So I work now with Business Map. Business Map perfectly matched the process that we defined. And I think for any digitization anyone attempts to do, always define your process. If you have to do it on paper first, do it on paper, and then look for a digital solution. One thing I learned is that a lot of people out there that want to sell you stuff, that they'll tell you their digital solution will solve your problem, but it really, really won't. So the team at Business Map perfectly match the Lean Lab process, and then from that you can get lots of data. And then you start to know that repeatability of how long things take. So if each task is sized in the same way, and you take 4 hours, you take 4 hours, you take 4 hours, and I take 5, the first question you're asking is why? And that's going back to the change process. If you don't prepare well, you'll end up having a tsunami of why. Because all these things and questions you've never asked yourself in the past about how long things take and who's doing what and how many problems and the amount of problem solving you have to do of why things are variable, all comes to the surface at the same time and everything grinds to a halt. But when you have got reliable and repeatable data for your constraint, which is your people, then you can start to feed that in to a capacity model. So this is the holy grail of working in a lab. So if you've got the times, you've got your people availability, then you can have your capacity. Your capacity is your people, you can just plug it in. And then you can then start to effectively plan things like stability studies, your validation, so you can level load across the year rather than having the huge peaks and troughs that can occur. So, in summary, QC teams can move to flow. It's a difficult transition to make, and there's lots around the culture and the people. A lot of trust involved, allowing people to pick and select their own work. But, and you have to keep on top of the transformation as well. You get new people in, they need retraining, and it's so easy to just say, well, they're trained on a couple of tasks, let them go and we'll get round to the other training. You have to keep on top of it. But if you do that, you can get to capacity modelling. You can understand your flow. You can make better resourcing decisions around who goes in your lab, what instruments you buy, and you really do get to know every constraint in that process. So, I got through that quite quickly, but so, any questions? Thank you very much. I got Keith's first.
Yeah, I'm sort of quite interested in the results you've seen, Stephen, both in terms of things like throughput and cycle time, but also people-orientated results. how it's felt to work there, and what happened in the wider organisation as you drove to do that? Because it must be quite difficult being on the critical path for manufacturing every hour of every day.
It is. So first one, cycle times come down. Some come down and become reliable and predictable. So for most oral solid dosage, so that's your tablets, there's no reason why they can't go through a lab in 3 days. And it gets to 3 days. It just gets, and that, with the stability samples, you have a regulatory requirement to analyse those samples within 1 month of the pull. So being able to then plan, if you've got reliable, it takes 3 days, you can wait till day 20 something and then flow. So it makes it so much easier to manage that, and you get reliable, predictable cycle times and lead times. Then when it comes to the change and the people, you do have that full spectrum. The people that move to this way, you'll get your early adopters. You will get some people that won't, but the team working, that pulse, that daily pulse of working, coming in and working on what is the most important thing to be working on any one particular day, changes that culture in the team. And it's also getting there as well. I mean, in reflection to the earlier presentations, one thing I learnt from someone a lot wiser than me is that when you're starting on a change like this and you're going through it, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So when you can explain and deliver that and that you're with them, I like to think I gained my credibility because I started off working in a QC lab, going up to managing a QC function. So when you've got that credibility and you know you care and you're going to bring that team along, then yes, they engage. Some won't. Some like the previous system, want to come in told what to do, but most enjoy it because it does create a different culture in the team. Any more?
Well, it was kind of related to that, but it was in the old system, people would feel like they could set their own work in terms of how they worked, with the time they wanted to take.
Yeah.
Tasks, and then turn them into basically, no, you've got set times in which to do this because the system pulls. So how do you break that down? Because some people will enjoy it, some people will hate it.
Yeah, some people hate it. So one team, they go in and they got their set schedule for the following week on a Friday afternoon. First thing they did, go around everyone else and see what they were doing. And then everyone will start complaining about the fact that some people have got more work than others. It's like, why have they got all the complicated tasks and that person over there? And they're all muttering the different subgroups. And it's because the work had been constantly organised around competence and engagement and the capacity and the quality of the work. But when you move to that system, and it isn't about doing things, each task, well, you've got 4 hours to do it, therefore you've got to do it in 4 hours. It's if it takes you 5, then let's understand why. And it's a huge amount of variation when you first start on this, because all those whys you've buried for years. And one why in a lab that I worked in, a series of instruments went down. And why have they gone down? Because there's a hydrogen generator on each bench. So why have the hydrogen generators gone down? Because they haven't been topped up. Why have they not been topped up? Because they got topped up with water and the hydrogen's generated out of the water. So, because John retired last week. And a week later, everyone found out one of his jobs was to top up the hydrogen generators. And no one knew. True story. No one knew until every instrument went down. So these things happen, and those things have just been buried. It surfaces everything, but the flow improvement is so much worth it.
But did you get anyone leave because they were then not doing the thing they wanted to do?
Yes. Some people leave, some people were asked to leave, but on the whole, those instances were rare. On the whole, people could see there was something in it for them.
Behind you, Annie.
Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Thank you for sharing your insights. I used to work in the labs many years ago, so I was nodding with recognition. I think the challenge of capacity and demand is seen across multiple businesses and areas, and your example is in the QC labs. I'm not looking for an answer. I'm interested in your thoughts around how we can really help organisations or functions that are more transactional to understand capacity and demand. I'm thinking about tasks when people say, but I can't tell you how long that task takes. Because I believe that understanding capacity and demand will unlock a lot for them. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that. I'm not asking for an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly within the QC lab or any process which is constrained by people availability, it's a tough ask. It's easy to talk about capacity when you're looking at your OEE. You've got a packing line, it's operational for 10 hours, and you want it working for 9.5. Yeah, OEE, you can understand it. When it's overall labour effectiveness, a lot harder. Breaking the work down into sizable chunks, understanding the work and scoping the work, and not starting something until it's ready to be started, and making sure that you complete the task. That's, I think, they're the bookends, I think, when it comes to understanding people capacity. Don't start something unless you can finish it. Make sure you've done all the prep work, and then execute. And that goes, it's the same for any sort of manual labour process.
We had some different cycle times for the different colour products.
Yes, so the cycle time isn't standard. So for like I say, for a tablet, a batch of tablets, you can get through a day. If you've got something that's injectable, then you are limited by the micro testing. So it has to be sterility tested, and that takes time because you have to take samples and then make sure it's sterile, and that takes a month of incubation. So you can't get that product out any quicker than 28 days. But what you can do is line up all the other tests so that when they go out on day 28, it's ready to go.
Yeah, it's kind of like, because you've separated things out and people pull as the need, you're kind of creating maybe piggybacking along and taking out unnecessary changes or delays.
Yeah, so you stack up the work and make sure that it flows. Yeah. And make sure if you've got work that goes at different rates, it flows into the same point.
It's very elegant. I love it. But in a way, I'm thinking, how did that change come about? Because it's kind of obvious in hindsight, so we do a retrospective strategy. And I could kind of guess that people operating the old world weren't really that interested in making incremental improvements, which would...
Oh, yeah.
This. So how did that come about, and how much pushback, and what did it feel like?
So how did it come about? So you're absolutely right. So operational excellence people who've never worked in a lab would never come up with this. It's not something... It came about because I worked in a QC lab. So it sort of came about through necessity. So I worked for AstraZeneca. I ended up getting deployed to a manufacturing site that failed 2 FDA inspections. So necessity was one. So I got pulled and then found myself waking up in Texas after 2 failed FDA inspections. And when a site fails an FDA inspection, the senior leaders are all very, very interested. One of those, and most of the observations of that site were based on QC. So when your head of quality comes down and sees the transformation in that lab, then turns around and said, literally, we have 28 more sites. Can you make them all like this one? That's how that came about. It just took one leader to see something and say, that's how it came about. The pushback, and again, cultural differences globally, a bit of a challenge. But once you've got one team going, then they can see the advantage. But the push system and how that it's so ingrained in how QC functions work. There was no appetite to change.
Just to follow up on that, so how did it change the role of the team leader?
The team leader, the scheduler became someone that looked at the performance, the team leader then became the coach. The team leader isn't intervening, they're actually working with the people. The team leader's then going in and seeing what the problems are, why is something, and helping that person with the why. So their role became better because they're doing all the things they wanted to do, but previously didn't have time for. Okay, doke.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.